Welcome to Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Gemini, and today is Saturday, the 17th of March, 2012. We are joined this evening by an expert in the mystical, Brian Mercer. Brian is the author of Mastering Astral Projection, 90-Day Guide to an Out-of-Body Experience, and the companion CD, Mastering Astral Projection. Mastering Astral Projection mentioned prominently in Publishers Weekly and was featured on such international radio shows as Unknown Country with Whitley Strieber and Coast to Coast with George Norrie. Mastering Astral Projection was a cover article for New Worlds magazine and second runner-up in the 2005 International Coalition for Visionary Resource Awards. Brian had a short story published by the age of 18 and is the author of a science fiction action-adventure trilogy, The Caladius Reflection, a story about old souls reborn in the distant future to reclaim a lost destiny. Good evening, Brian. Welcome to Time Monk Radio Network.
Thanks very much.
The executive producer is Fox, and he will be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the Time Monk Forum were kind enough to join us this evening. Please welcome members Five Cook, Chipper Dog, and Lenny. This interview will be available for free on the Time Monk Radio Facebook page, YouTube, and at the website timemonkradio.com. Brian, your background is in business and information systems. Do you mind sharing what led you to become involved with the mystical and astral traveling?
Sure, yeah, it's kind of a strange combo, but I've always been interested in the topic of astral projection. Well, I guess it started with near-death experiences, and when I learned about out-of-body experiences and the fact that you could, have this profound spiritual experience and not, die, I thought this is very interesting. So I was always reading a lot of information on this subject, and when I stumbled upon early on Robert Monroe's work, and he was giving advice on how to actually make that happen. So kind of always had, even in college, had that interest in having the experience myself. And then about 10 years ago, I picked up one of the best books on astral projection there is written by Robert Bruce, called Astral Dynamics. And
yes.
And it's this beautiful, but it's 500-page book, and in it, all throughout it, it's giving advice on what you need to do, kind of step 3, and then step 1, and step 5. And so I'm going through the book, and I'm writing down kind of a program for myself. I was treating it like a programming specs almost. And at the end of that, I came up with this 90-day program for myself, and I ended up emailing it to Robert Bruce, and he looked at it and wanted to put it on his website, and it just sort of evolved into a book.
Very nice. I was kind of curious when I read your biography and I started reading the book myself, what led you to that with the background that you have? Thank you.
Yeah, I actually had some out-of-body experiences early on, and so that also led me to want to do it again.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get started here, and we're going to cover some of the basics of astral projection, and the first question is from Five Cook.
Yes, Brian. What success rate can you expect for astral projection?
In terms of, I guess I would say it depends. I would say, first of all, that everyone projects at night when they go to sleep. So probably a better question would be, what would be the success rate for people who are trying to do this in a conscious way? And I think there are certain people who are natural projectors. They have the right mindset. They might be, very relaxed people, very laid back, or maybe they've done a lot of meditation and they're very good at quieting their mind. Or maybe they're just pretty advanced spiritually, and having an out-of-body experience is just kind of their, next step in their own personal spiritual advancement. So I think there's that set of people, but I think generally for people just like the regular Joe, I think it can vary. But what I would say is that oftentimes learning astral projection can take a fair amount of time. So it would depend on whoever's trying it, their willingness to put in the time and the effort. But and it can be difficult for some.
Well, I was wondering the way you phrased that earlier. Is it possible that people, or you say people do project at night, is it possible people are projecting without realizing it, and then the next day they think, oh, wow, that was quite a dream?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I had a few of those myself early on, and one of the more profound was I thought it was a dream. It had definitely had the elements of an out of body experience. This occurred when I was like in the fourth grade, and then when I was in the fifth grade, that experience actually happened, and it was such a unique experience. It could not have just been a coincidence. It had to have been something there. So clearly, I think that happens to a lot of people.
Okay. Thank you. Dreaming fascinates me, and I'm always trying to figure out what's it all about. So, okay, I'll throw it back to Lindy then.
Hi, Brian. You discuss techniques to develop the skill to astrally project, and you start with raising one's energy. Can you share with our listeners how to raise your energy?
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about the energy body, and if you think of who we are, we're all really energy beings, just in physical bodies. And I think the simplest way to think of our energy bodies is as a subtle reflection of our physical bodies. So some of the characteristics of the energy body is that it includes various interdependent energy circuits and primary energy centers. You might have heard of chakras and energy storage areas. So in order to consciously astral project successfully, ideally you'd have a lot of personal energy available to do that. And just going through life, we pick up energy in different ways. We absorb energy in different ways. So like sleeping and eating and drinking and breathing and sunlight, exercise, interaction with others, even interaction with the earth and in different environments will give us different levels of energies. But as we get older, I think our ability to take in energy can be reduced. And so there's this technique for raising energy and storing it in some of the energy centers that are located in the body that is helpful for projection. And so let's talk about why it would be helpful to have a lot of energy for projection. When you go out of body, you can have various complications, and I'll talk about one. Say when I was first learning to project, and I didn't have a lot of extra energy available. One of my first projections was that I separated from the body, and I kind of floated near the bed onto the floor, and I couldn't move. And it was just a really low level projection. I just kind of sat there until I eventually could make it back to my body. But there are other complications with not having a lot of energy when you have an astral projection experience. So there could be vision problems or the ability to perceive your environment. It could affect the way how lucid you are in the out of body state, or your ability to just think straight. It could affect your ability to remember the experience after it happens. So, and of course, there's just the ability to project and get out. So the more energy you have available, the better quality experience you're going to have. So if we're talking about the energy body, there are three energy storage areas. There is the subnavel, which is it's a couple inches below your belly button, kind of where your belt buckle would be. And that stores and keeps available energy for physical activity. And then there is the subheart energy storage area, and that's kind of in the center of your chest. And that stores energy for your for emotional energy, essentially. And then there's the subbrow area, or kind of your third eye in the center of your forehead, and that stores raw mental and psychic energy. And so the idea, so if you want to raise energy, and you can do this, ideally you would do it in a quiet state, where you can really do it on the bus, even just walking around when you get good at it. So what you would do is you would sit in a chair and just kind of relax and be very present in the moment. And you would center your attention on your feet, and you would draw energy. You would imagine just keeping your focus of attention on your feet and drawing it up through your legs, and up through your body and up to the top of your head, your crown center, or your crown chakra. And as you're doing that, you're inhaling. And you're just drawing this energy up your body. And when you're done with the inhale and you're ready to exhale, you would bring that energy down kind of over your face, through your mouth, into your throat, down into the subnavel, kind of down where a couple inches below your belly button. And you would just kind of store that energy there. And then you would repeat the cycle with your breathing. And you just keep doing that. And you can't raise enough energy if you store it in that and I would always recommend to do it in that sub navel area.
You mean first, or you don't just charge up the sub and then go to the chest and then the brow?
I think my understanding is that if you were to, I think that generally there are other means where you can energize and store energy in your sub-heart and sub-brow areas, but I don't think you would want to just do that directly. I think there could be complications, energetic complications with doing that. I think you always want to put it into the sub-navel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then you also describe methods to quiet the inner voice, reduce the inner dialogue. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think when I talk to people who are learning to have a conscious out-of-body experience, it's one of the most difficult things for people because, our world is, first of all, it's just filled with a lot of information, a lot of noise, but also just there's that little voice in your head that always is commenting on things and passing judgment, even maybe singing popular tunes. And the idea when you're trying to learn to have an out-of-body experience is to quiet that mind, and which can be a tall order if you're not used to doing that. So one of the things that I learned is that if you can keep your mind quiet for 3 minutes, you can pretty much do it indefinitely. So early on, my goal was to get to that 3-minute mark. And how I did that starting off was that I put a chair in, I got Post-it notes and I numbered them 1 to 12, like numbers of a clock. And I put them on the wall like in the shape of a clock. And then I timed how long it took to go through a deep breathing exercise. So if I, inhale and exhale, it took about 15 seconds. And so I determined that if I went for a count of 4, I would have kept my mind quiet for a minute. And so I just looked at this kind of clock on the wall. And the reason I put Post-it notes and didn't look at a real clock was I found the second hand distracting, what time it was distracting. So I just focused on the number and I took a deep breath and I did 1, and I did 2. And if my inner voice interrupted me, I'd start again at 1 and 2 and 3. And gradually I made my way around the clock until I got to 12. And I've gotten to the point now where I can just quiet my mind and just focus in on my breathing, and that's enough to keep it quiet. But when you first are practicing this, there's quite a bit of tension because you're not used to keeping that inner voice quiet. And it's like, it actually feels like, there's like, you want it to make a comment, but you can't. And it takes a while for that to kind of relax and just get in the flow of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lenny. Up next is Chipper Doc.
That sounds just really, really similar to some of the techniques that the yogis talk about. What you were talking about with the breath, cycling the breath and bringing it back down, is described in pranayama and is affected by the locks of the body. Are you familiar at all with that?
Not to a great extent. Can you elaborate?
Well, there's 3 locks: the root lock, the throat lock at the top, and the Uddiyana Bandha lock, which is right there at your solar plexus that you were talking about. And the prana, according to Ayurvedic tradition, wants to go down in the lower half of the body and wants to rise up in the upper half of the body. And when you were talking about concentrating your focus in your solar plexus, in your solar chakra. Your I get labels confused a lot of
Sure.
times, but it sounds very, very familiar and similar to that. And, knowing that you don't have that background in yoga, it's just amazing to me when I run across these correspondences.
Right. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think the subnavel is a little bit lower than the solar plexus. I think it's actually,
Right.
but again, it's the same sort of cycling. Yeah, I agree.
Well, getting back on track, this question is from board member Nomadic. What is your opinion on the importance of body position during projection attempts?
That's a great question, and I don't know why this is, but it seems to me that for whatever reason, lying on your back is the most effective way to have an out of body experience. I have projected on my side before, and I think on my stomach, but I would say 90 to 95% of the time when I project and I remember it, it's when I'm lying on my back, and I don't know why.
Have you noticed an orientation of your body, north or south, east or west, in relation to that?
I haven't. I don't. I know that Robert Monroe, one of the things at the Monroe Institute, they would have your head facing north, and let me think about it. When I first was practicing it, I was orienting my body the same way, and now that I think about it, both my beds in the house are oriented with the head toward the north. So
Yeah.
maybe
just kind of aligned that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent, and that also goes along with my experience as well. And I ended up for years, regardless of knowing the direction beforehand, finding my bed facing north.
That's funny. That's funny.
A follow-up of that, again from Nomadic, is do food choices affect astral projection success or failure? For example, would abstaining from meat for a period of time make projection easier?
That's also a good question. My understanding is that just before you project, that for whatever reason, eating protein will tend to make it difficult to do that in a conscious way. And so I would say if you're going to practice to get out of body, eating a meal just beforehand, kind of like, going swimming, you wouldn't want to do that, but especially with protein. And so I would say 2 or 3 hours, but wouldn't say necessarily that having a vegetarian lifestyle would make it easier to project, because I think just to be healthy needs to have protein.
Right. Yeah.
In some form. Yeah.
And it helps keep you grounded too.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
Again, from Nomadic, and I'm just reading the question. When the vibrations begin for me, my breathing becomes faster as I realize what is happening. I feel like I can't breathe, and my focus returns to the body so that I do not succeed in projecting. What techniques do you use to avoid being derailed by this kind of fear response?
Yeah, I know exactly, because when you read a lot about astral projection and out-of-body experiences, at some point it's all theory until it starts happening to you. Yeah, exactly. And when it starts happening to you, there's definitely a little that first, unless you're really adventurous, there's definitely a freak out factor when it first happens. So, and I definitely experienced that myself when I was first learning to project, and it's such a visceral experience. It's like, whoa. And I don't even say it would be fear necessarily. It's just shock at this, very practical, this very real thing that's going on that you kind of thought could happen, but now it's happening. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to change my mind. So what I did to overcome that, there was a couple of things I did to overcome that. I think basically the response to that is to stay relaxed and to keep your mind clear. So what I would do, a couple things, in waking life, I'm the kind of person who, if I'm a passenger in a car and someone takes a curb too fast, I'm grabbing onto the seat. So it was like relaxing in those type of situations and relaxing when, say, an airplane's taking off and landing.
Yeah.
But also there's this technique that Robert Bruce, my co-author, taught me, which was to sit down in a hardback chair with some neck support.
Yeah.
And it's best to be a little drowsy when you do this. And what I did what I would do is, like, on a summer day, I would sit on the porch and I would be in this chair. And what happens is, if you're drowsy, if you're the right state of consciousness, you're kind of drowsy, you'll start to fall asleep and it will feel like you're falling through the chair.
Right.
Because the uncomfortableness of the hardback chair will keep you just awake enough so that you're kind of in this semi-wake sleep state. And just continuing to practice that and not tense up when you feel that falling.
Kind of like surfing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's just amazing.
Thank you, Chipper. Brian, I've read that one can control the movements in the astral travel experience by thinking of being in a particular place or by simply wishing to go a certain direction, and that the projection is instantaneous. Has this been your experience as well?
It has on occasion. When I like I said, when I was first learning to go out of body, a lot of my projections were very low level energy projections, so I wouldn't be able to get very far. When I got a little better at it, my goal would be to project to my parents' house. So I live in Seattle and my parents live in Sacramento, and my idea was that I could go there and I could kind of find out what was going on there, and then later ask them, and report what I saw, and to see if what I saw was really what was taking place. And almost invariably I could project there because it was the house I grew up in, and so I knew it very well. And I should also say that my parents have lived in the house for 45 years, and over the years they've had about 4 or 5 major remodels. And so you can look at pictures of the house, and you can know within 4 or 5 years, or so, what time period it is. And invariably, when I would project to my parents' house, it would be in the past. And so I could project there instantly, but usually it wouldn't be in present time.
That's really interesting. I have to kind of wrap my mind around that a bit.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. There was one time I actually projected to my old bedroom, and I saw myself sleeping in the bed. That was a little freaky.
Yeah, I read that you had that experience.
Yeah, that was but it would, and that was really early on. After a while, now when I project, it's usually into the astral planes. But in the early days, when I was more staying around the real time zone, the Earth type environment, and usually it was always my parents' house that I was trying to project to, and invariably it would be, a long time ago.
Okay, very interesting. Also, I wanted to know how binaural beats aid in the ability to astral project.
Sure. How technical? I don't know how technical you want me to get with this answer, because I
guess whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay, all right. Well, Stop me if I slip into something that's too, or if you want more detail.
Okay, I sure
I guess
will.
the short answer. So binaural beats are like something you would listen to with headphones, and they're basically tones that you would hear in each ear, or multiple tones, and essentially they coax your brain waves into the ideal state for astral projection. So let me just talk briefly about what's going on when we're practicing conscious astral projection. So think about the natural process of going to sleep and the sleep projection process. What's happening is you go to bed, and you kind of relax, and after a while your mind starts to quiet and maybe wander and go into kind of half dreams, and then eventually your body would slip off into sleep, and your conscious mind would go with it, and at some point in time in that process you would project, and your spirit body would go out and have adventures, astral adventures and such. And so essentially, when you're practicing conscious exit astral projection, you're trying to replicate that same natural process that happens when you go to sleep, except with one key difference. you're trying to keep her mind awake. And so what the binaural beats do is it synchronizes the two hemispheres of the brain, and ideally it's trying to coax your brain into the right frequencies that kind of mimic that body awake, mind asleep state. So do you want more? I could go on.
Oh,
So,
sure.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Please.
okay. So there are various frequencies that correspond with very level of consciousness. So I think there's a beta, or awake state that we have when we're walking around and we're conscious, and that's like I think 14 to 30 hertz in terms of your brain waves. And then there's an alpha state. I think that's something like 8 to 13, and that's kind of like the meditative state. If you were meditating, that's kind of where you would be. And then there's I would say the 4 to 7 hertz area, and that's theta consciousness, and that's kind of what your mind's doing when it's going into a deep sleep. And then anything below 4 is kind of a delta deep sleep state. And what I found when I was researching doing the various binaural beats that are associated with mastering astral projection is that the ones that were most successful for astral projection were ones that were kind of mimicking this body asleep, mind awake state. So usually there would be one main tone that was at a beta, that was trying to coax your brain into a beta state. And then there would be one or more levels that would either descend to or be in the 4 hertz delta sleep. So you were getting these two simultaneous, frequencies going on of
Straddling
beta,
the stream,
yeah,
so to speak.
exactly. And so ideally it would just it's that body sleep, mind awake state that you're trying to get into.
Okay, that's really interesting. I know when I listen to your CD, it does.
Yeah, it does. It can, and I've actually heard people have several different experiences, not necessarily out of body experiences. One of the first people I talked to who I think they were just listening to the relaxation program had a spontaneous past life regression type experience, which was fascinating.
It is fascinating. Well, and
Would that have triggered by the frequency that they heard, you think? That resonance between that past state and their current awareness?
If I recall the energy, the frequency of that particular binaural beat program, it was at the low end of the meditative state.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't know what I don't know why. It wasn't intentional, but that's nonetheless what happens.
I just got the thought of the meditative state that you gave, the 8 to 13 range, encompasses the Schumann resonance.
Yes.
And does that play a part in your idea?
If I recall, the Schumann resonance, that's like promotes healing. Am I right?
As I understand it, that's the frequency at which the earth sings.
That's right. Okay. I suppose that's possible, but I don't think the Schumann resonance is the 8 hertz that she would have been in during that program.
See.
So
okay. Yeah, I just find the correspondences between different views and different experiences fascinating.
Right. One of the things about binaural beats that I've found from personal experience is that when you're first learning and you're using them, the first time you hear them, they're very effective. It's almost like you're fooling the brain into thinking that the brain's asleep and the body's asleep and the mind's awake, or vice versa. But after you listen to them again and again, it's like your body kind of figures out, okay, this isn't real. And so I think in order for them to be effective long term, that you wouldn't necessarily, you wouldn't grow addicted to them, and I don't think that you would want to use them the same one every time for too long.
Yeah, right. You don't want to develop a habit and then go into it unconsciously.
Well, in fact, I don't think that if you use the same program, for more than a few weeks, that it would be as effective as it was when you first were listening to it.
Yeah, your brain will make adjustments and
Right.
get used to it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. That was incredible.
Thank you. Brian, I've read that there's a silver cord that keeps one's astral body attached to the physical body while projecting so that one stays connected to the physical realm. Has this been your experience or understanding? And if so, is there a danger to the cord becoming severed? And how would such occur?
Well, I've read about the silver cord, but I've never actually seen my own. But also I've never looked, so it's possible. I'm sure it would be
Okay.
there if I look for it.
Okay.
But my understanding is that there is some sort of energy filament that connects your spirit body to your. Well, look, actually, let's talk a little bit about what's happening during an out-of-body experience to put this in context. When you think about an out-of-body experience, the thought is that you're leaving your body, this empty shell, and that your spirit is leaving your body and going out and having adventures. But an out-of-body experience is a little bit of a misnomer. What's actually happening is that your energy body that is always in your body, in your physical body when you're alive, is producing this projectable double, this copy, this like a copy of your main energy body, but maybe more subtle, that would travel in an astral environment or different realms, and that would be connected by that silver cord you were talking about. And what was happening is that you're actually projecting a copy of consciousness into that projectable double. And so, in fact, you have a copy of consciousness and an energy body in your physical body, and then you have this double that's out there, experiencing these out-of-body experiences. And so I don't think that necessarily that that cord can be severed, but I don't know.
Okay. I was just kind of curious. I've never actually seen it because I haven't had a successful projection yet, consciously anyway. So, well, I think we'll move on to cautions, risks, and ethics of astral projection. And Five Cook will be asking the question.
Yes, I have a question from forum member Andromeda. Brian, do you suggest using protection prior to astral projection? And if so, will you describe the methods and why it's necessary?
Sure. I generally as a rule, I don't put any protection, use any protection. It sounds weird. I don't put any sort of energetic protection around my body because it's not like it's this empty shell where it's not like some entity's gonna jump in it and walk around and have a beer. So generally I don't. But I wouldn't if I wouldn't project in a situation where if I was angry or fearful or depressed, I don't think that's a good time to practice projection, because I think the law of attraction. I think you're going to maybe attract an experience that might be unsavory. So I don't think that would necessarily require any. It would just be requiring not projecting under the wrong circumstance. And I think also if you're in a place or a room that has kind of bad energy, that doesn't feel right, or a place maybe that's, I don't know, has a reputation for being haunted, I wouldn't think you'd want to project in that. But if you were interested in doing some sort of protection technique, there are a couple of methods for doing that. One of them would be to before you were to project, to make sure the space, first of all, that you choose is a light, bright, happy energy, and then to mentally, as you're in a relaxed state, to surround that room and your body in white light. And the other possibility would be to use a very large grounding cord and ground that room so that it felt very protected and very down to earth.
Well, have you ever had an unpleasant astral projection? And if so, what technique did you use to return?
I haven't actually had a lot of negative experiences. I think the most unpleasant experience was that I saw this kind of raccoonish rat type thing, and it bit me. It seemed to try to bite me. And the thing is, that was when I was first learning to project, and my biggest obstacle when I was first learning to project wasn't to get back in my body. It was being able to stay out of my body for any length of time. So I think I was, after that, was back in my body pretty quick. So, but I really haven't had that many unpleasant experiences.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Five Cook. And Lenny has a few questions for you, Brian.
Sure.
Hi, Brian. Are there any repercussions of astral travelers interacting with, let's say, dreaming earthbound people? In other words, astrally traveling to somebody who's asleep and then interacting with them in some way that they might not consent to or know about or want to do? Or
That's an interesting question. I mean, like, what do you, interacting in what way?
well, let's say that an astral traveler decided to go visit somebody
Okay.
and they had an interest in them, maybe a romantic interest, and
Oh,
it
sure.
wasn't reciprocated, you know.
Sure, sure.
Are there any repercussions to that sort of behavior?
You know, I,
'Cause I-
I don't know that there would. I don't think there's any kind of astral cops that would, pick you up. I don't think. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily want to do anything that you've been.
Astralites.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's anything that you would want to do astrally that you would do. But I mean, I would imagine. So it depends. If I would think that if you went to someone in a loving kind of way, um, that's a different experience than it would if you were going out and, say, wanting a sexual experience. Um, but one of the interesting things about this topic in general is that, and I think if you read some of Robert Monroe's work, that you'll find he mentions this, and I know Robert, my co-author, has, and I certainly have, is that when you're in an out-of-body state and you see someone of the opposite sex, you could an overwhelming sexual energy will oftentimes overcome you, and if you and it's easy to give into, and if you do that, and one of the things Robert, my co-author, said is that sort of behavior can become addicting, and he warned me very early on is that to consider that sort of thing a distraction from where you want to go, because it really does kind of mess up the projection at that point. It's become something different. So I would say you wouldn't want to do that only because, I mean, if the sexual experience was what your goal was, that it might lead down the wrong path. Whereas if you were going to that person, say, in a loving sort of way, it might be a different experience than you would have in the body with that person. Does that make sense?
And that's a very enlightening answer. I didn't realize that it was something that people had talked about as a possible addiction, but I could see how that could happen. So I have a follow-up question to that, is so that when another person, let's say the person who was dreaming, who was asleep, saw somebody in their astral body, what would they see? What would they usually see?
So are you saying that the other person would be asleep and then you would astrally project to them, and what would they?
And then the other person might like wake up or kind of be aware of you. What
I
would be
see.
what does an astrally projected person usually look like?
Look like? I've had various experiences where, if usually if I am in the Earth-like environment, the real-time zone, and I see someone else, they pretty much look like they do in life, and even though they'd be
Oh,
wearing clothes. I've had, when I'm in the astral realms, where I've been in astral realms where I've also had that experience where I've been at a various level, and people will be gathered there and they'll look like people, and they'll have bodies and they'll have clothes and they'll be interacting. But I've also been in environments that look almost like you're in space, and I would see people as points of light or like stars.
uh-huh.
And so I think really depends on where you are. I should
Okay.
say, early on when I was first learning to project, I was projecting around the house, and I saw my wife kind of sleepwalking in her out-of-body state, and she looked just like she normally would. Interesting.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. Brian, Five Cook has a question for you.
Yes, I have a question from Phoenix on the forum. Do you have any thoughts on who should not try astral projection and why?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, again, I would say that if you're in a negative time in your life and you're depressed, again, if you're not feeling if you're feeling angry, that would be one situation. Or if you're in an environment that just feels bad, those would be two circumstances where you wouldn't want to project. I think the people who are best projectors are people who are pretty grounded in their life and in reality. And I think if there are people out there who live a lot of their time in kind of a fantasy world and not quite in touch with being a spirit and a body in this life right now, that they may want to do some exercises to become a little bit more grounded before they try to do a lot of astral travel. That's what my advice.
Okay. I was fascinated a moment or two ago. You were talking in response to an answer regarding people who get sidetracked onto sexual type motives. First thing I thought about was, it's odd that we have a split mind type thing going here where one part of us wants to do one thing and one part wants to do another. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any comments, or what's behind that, or what's the deal with that?
Well, I think when you're one of the things that a question I get asked a lot is like, can you go out of body and can you like spy on somebody? And it's funny to think that would be a question, because usually you might have an intention to go someplace or do something when you are wanting to project, but unless that was truly your motive, when you do find yourself out, that I don't think you're really going to necessarily do that. And so I think that's more of a you're more, once you're out of your body, you're more subject to whims unless you really have a real reason to want to get to a certain location. That was truly a desire. So I think it's just that kind of, you're in this mode where it's like you're in this new environment. You're realizing that you're not just a physical body, but you're something more. And I think there's a capricious nature to that sort of energy, that sort of experience.
Okay, that's a lot of lot of food for thought. I'll have to chew on that for a while then. But thank you, Brian.
Let me just ask a follow-up question on that, Brian.
Sure.
You said unless you have an intent to go to a specific place for a specific purpose or whatever,
right.
Do you find that you pretty much carry into the astral realm the manner in which you live your life here? I mean, I kind of get that sense of that from what you're saying, is that depending on how you go into that state, you start with harmonious environment and
right.
and music or binaural beats that take the rough edges off, I guess.
Right.
Is how I'd say that. And with these lower and higher energies that Five Cook referred to, and the sexual nature that you were talking about, would that be a mixing of those levels of energy?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know a lot about this, but I think Kundalini energy. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So I think that is and again, I don't know a lot, so I might be misstating it. But I think that that is an energy. Doesn't that start like at your root chakra and it goes up through all your chakras, and kind of. And I think that's a very spiritual energy, but at the same time, I think that energy is associated with some sort of sexual energy.
Well,
And
yeah, right.
so one of the things, and I don't know if this makes sense to talk about, but we were talking about earlier about having someone experience the vibrations and become scared about those vibrations. One of the things that I, even more so than that, have experienced that when the vibrations start, there's going to be this wave of sexual energy that goes through your body at that time that can even be more distracting than the vibrations themselves, and
Right.
can end up. And I think that has to do with, that we have various chakras, and one of
Right.
those is the genital chakra. And I think that if during your energy practice you are stimulating that maybe too much or even at all, that level of energy can shoot through your body. So I would say that you could have someone who potentially
Has not yet restrained that urge.
right, but I would say that you could have someone who isn't necessarily in life a person who needs to have the sexual experiences, but that just that energy, if that energy is provoked, in
Right.
in your energy body, that it could overcome you when you're out. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily, but in general, I would agree with what you're saying, is that you're bringing your level of consciousness, you're bringing that experience to the astral.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Brian, you had touched on this a little bit when you said that you witnessed your wife um, walking, while she was asleep, having like a sleepwalking experience. You could see her energetic body. But I was kind of curious, while astral traveling, have you ever looked in a mirror while in the projection or while you've been in a different realm? If, like, for example, when you went to your parents' house, did you have a chance to look in a mirror? What did you experience, if so? And how does one see themselves and how does one feel during that experience? And does one feel the same age or do they look the same age? And I think you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, well, that's a good question. That's a great question. There was there were several times when I tried to look into a mirror. Uh, the most memorable one was when I was first learning to project. I projected to my parents' house, probably, when I would have been in the 5th grade or so. And what was fascinating about that particular projection was it was the first projection that was so real that it was more real than the way I'm talking to you now. It was everything in the room was absolutely crisp and sharp. And so if you think about, in the normal, when you're in a normal body, you would say, look at a cup on your desk, and then you would focus in on the cup, and that would be the center of your consciousness. Well, in this kind of state of awareness, everything in the room was perfectly in focus and crisp at the same time. And it was like, what am I have to go check out a mirror. So in this state, it wouldn't be better to look in a mirror in this one. So I went into where the bathroom was, and there's a big mirror in there. And when I looked at my image, there was just this blur. It was as if I put on glasses that weren't my own, and I couldn't. Just in that spot where I was, I couldn't see anything. So
Wow.
that was the only time I've looked in a mirror.
Do you have any idea why that was? That you couldn't see anything looking at yourself?
I don't. I have. There are times when I will be in my out of body state, and I will catch a glimpse of my leg or my arm, and there will be an arm there, and it will have clothes on, and there will be a leg there, and it will have clothes on. So,
right,
but I don't know. But I have talked to a reader who told me about a fascinating experience in which her astral body was seen by people who were awake. Can I tell that story?
I would like to hear it.
I would too.
So this happened when she was in junior high school, and she was living at the time with her grandmother, and she was very interested on this particular day to going to school and to see her friends. And she unfortunately became very ill with like a 24-hour type of virus and a pretty high fever, and she was throwing up, and she stayed up all night, and it was like she was in a state of mind where you would project, because she was physically exhausted, but her mind was kind of awake. And she found, as the day wore on, she found herself at school. And it was one of those situations where it looked very real. And she saw her friends, and she saw where they were sitting, and she was able to just, later go to her friends and describe where they were, what they were doing, what they were talking about.
Right.
Now, two of her friends saw her at the school. The other two of her friends didn't. And so, and they swear that she was really there. They don't think it was anything otherworldly. They think they saw her.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on there, but that's fascinating.
Well, isn't that the same thing as depending on where you form your intent to visit astrally, there you are?
Absolutely. She wanted to see her friends, and she was in the right state of mind, and there she went.
The first time I read a Monroe book, back when I could still focus, I had a friend that was driving north in the state I lived in at the time, and I resolved to visit her, right? And this is, read chapter 5, try it, okay. And so I did, and I followed the breathing technique and the relaxation, and boom, I was sitting in the car seat between her and her friend. I saw her eye, and she saw me, and I snapped back. And so, yeah, that definitely happened to me.
And did she later report seeing you?
Yes, she did.
She
yes.
did. Wow.
She came back and unbidden said, I had the strangest sensation when driving.
Wow.
That you were sitting right there. And I go, I was.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's a great experience. And it's those kind of stories that occasionally I have people come to me and ask me, are this real? Is this just a situation where the brain is having some sort of very lucid experience? But then you hear stories like that, or you experience them themselves, and it's something more than that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chipper Dog. We are speaking with Brian Mercer. You can find more information about astral projection, including how to master astral projection with his CD companion, by visiting his website, www.caladrius.com, and that's KALADRIOUS, caladrius.com. Okay, Brian, next we're going to move on to benefits of astral travel, and Five Cook has a question for you.
Sure.
Yes, I have a question from forum member Nomadic. What are the benefits of having the ability to travel out of the body? Can one work on personal and spiritual issues as well as visit other entities, like deceased relatives? Are there meetings of projectors working on projects in the astral realm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a great way to approach it when you're going out of body, to have that as a goal to work on your spiritual progress. And I think that certainly that was one of my aims when I started to basically explore. And I've had some great experiences encountering my grandparents who had both passed on individually, and those were very cool. And I this is probably one of the best experiences I've had. I encountered what appears to be an ascended master, which was a very cool experience. And this is kind of gets to your question about, are projectors meeting in the astral realms? And so I had projected, and I was in what looked like a hotel ballroom, and it was like with tables, like it was a wedding reception, and they all had white tablecloths, and there were it was very light colored curtains on the side. And there was this older man, and he was giving a lecture, and I don't remember what he was lecturing on, but he was telling a bunch of us. It was like we were at some sort of seminar, some sort of astral seminar, and we were all sitting around the table listening to this guy speak. And then the scene changed, and it was at nighttime, and a school bus had careened off the road, and it was kind of halfway in a ditch, and there were blinking lights. And I remember going up into the school bus, and there was this, and I don't remember if the person was a child or if it was an adult, but I remember she was Asian and that she wasn't conscious. And I remember going up to her, and my hands were glowing. I believe they were glowing green, and it kind of like ET, I guess. And I put this green glowing energy into her heart area, and it kind of lit up, and then she kind of sat up and regained consciousness.
Wow.
And then I was back in that the seminar place again, and it was almost as if he was teaching us something about whatever we had just done, and that was either a test or a practical application of whatever he was talking about. But what I remember the most about that was the older gentleman, and when he said, when the lecture was over, I walked up to him and I thanked him, and he said to me, he said, "Brian, you're welcome to come here anytime." And it was just this, it wasn't just overwhelming, gushing, lovey thing. It was just he was just full of love and calmness, but he was like kind of a normal person, and I've never forgotten that. So I think those other, not that I remember, but I think those other people in that seminar, whatever it was, were other projectors, and we were learning something.
Wow, that's really neat. Not to be personal, but I was curious, when you met your grandparents, did you get a chance to know them much before they crossed over? Or
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Was
so
it? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sure, I can talk about several different experiences. They're all a little bit different. One experience was when I was learning to project, and I think it was one of those situations where I woke up and I turned on I normally can't sleep on my back very well, which is, if you're trying to learn how to project, is not a good thing. But I had turned over and I was lying on my back, and I was having this dream in which I was in my parents' backyard, and there was an open gravesite back there, and they were going to reinter my grandmother in the backyard. And the thought, she was a very wonderful, angelic person, and at the thought that she was gone, I was just missing her so much, and I got very emotional in the dream, and I started to cry.
Well, sure.
And yeah, and all of a sudden the dream kind of just melted away, and I was in my room again, and my grandmother was there, and she was at the time, I thought she was in a white dress with a white veil, like a wedding dress. But now I wonder if it was I was just seeing light around her. And she was young, and so young that if I didn't know who it was, I would not have recognized her. She was beautiful, and she put her hand on my hand, and she was telling me not to cry, that everything was okay. And it's the kind of thing she would have done in life. And so it's almost as if she had sensed that I was feeling sad on her behalf, and she had come to comfort me, and I was in that learning astral projection state where I actually remembered the genuine experience. So that was one.
Yes, so neat. Go ahead.
One of them happened more recently, where I met my grandfather, her husband. And this happened pretty recently. And again, I was projecting, and I saw him, and I was really excited to see him. And I remember talking to him and realizing, for whatever he looked very young and handsome, but again, I knew it was him. And this is a kind of one of those things where, I knew I didn't have a lot of time to ask the questions I wanted to. And I thought, well, he, has been in the afterlife. I can ask anything I want. And I had one question, and this is the question I asked, and I regret it, but, it was one of those things I asked, can you still watch TV in the afterlife? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, no, there's no TV in the afterlife. And I remember saying, not even football? And that was the end of it. That was the end. I didn't get a chance to ask another question. So, but it was good to see him again. And then the night on the other side of the family, my other grandfather, the night he passed away, and again, I experienced this as a dream, but well, I'll relate it, and you can tell me. So I was with my father, and we were just kind of standing around, and my father's cell phone rings, and he answers it, and it's my grandfather, and he says that he's passed on, and he just wanted to call and say goodbye. So my dad talks to him for a minute, and he puts me on the phone, and I remember being really excited, talking to him. Oh, you're making the transition. That's really cool. And I just kept talking, and finally he interrupts me and says, Brian, look, I got to go. There's some guys here. I'm kind of busy. I've got things to do. And I said, oh, right. Sorry. So woke up, told my wife about what I considered a dream. And then about, I would say 3 hours later, I was at work and my father called me and told me that my grandfather had passed away. And he was old. And so, but the fact that it happened around the time when he passed, it had to be some sort of projection.
No, I agree. That's too big a coincidence. So, do you ever have trouble keeping track of what's in a dream versus what's a real projection?
Yeah, what that's actually a great question. And I think there's several things that could be going on when you project, and it really depends on what state of consciousness from which you project. So, for example, if you were let's say you're learning how to astrally project, and you're sitting down and you're kind of going to sleep, and your body's starting to go to sleep, and you separate from your body, and you move around your house, and you're looking at things, and you may be teasing the cat or whatever, going around your house. And Robert and my advice is when you're learning to project, to make those projections short, especially at first, because what happens is the body starts to go to sleep, and you start to your brain mind starts to dream. And I believe that through that silver cord, I think that you will start to a couple things could happen. Dream elements could appear in where you are. Things become less lucid, or when your astral body returns to your physical body, and all those memories are downloaded from the projectable double to your physical brain mind. It's possible that you have these two sets of memories that occurred simultaneously, and it's possible that dream elements could imprint themselves over, almost like double exposing film, and so that your memory of something might have dream elements in it because of that. So it can be difficult to distinguish, but the more you experience astral projection, and the more you hone that, what Robert, my co-author, refers to as shadow memory recall, and that kind of that ability to remember the astral experiences and write them down and make them more coherent. And there are techniques for staying lucid in the astral body that will help. But the more you hone that memory ability, the easier it is to make that distinction.
Okay. Boy, Brian, my head's just exploding, but this is great.
Sorry.
No, thank you very much. It's such good information. Okay, thank you for now from me.
Thank you, Five Cook. Brian, we're going to move on to astral travel destinations, and Lenny has a question for you.
Hi, Brian. Do you encounter the same places or levels that Robert Monroe discusses, the levels where maybe people who have passed over reside, or people in a coma, or places where angelic beings gather? Do you encounter these places when you astral travel? And also, do the binaural beats correlate to any particular place that you might visit?
Sure, sure. I have gone to various realms and astral levels. I would think of, if you're thinking of quantum physics, places in the multiverse, and I have experienced encountering people I've on both, in a couple of occasions, I've seen my grandmother and my grandfather when I've been projecting, at least a couple of times. But if I'm thinking about Robert Monroe, I think he talks about the park, and I believe I've been there. But I don't think as such. But I definitely will go to various levels. Did that answer your question?
Yes. So do you ever, so that you can kind of, you said earlier you wanted to go to your parents' house and you could go there. And I guess I was asking if you had ever gone to any other place, any etheric realms where you said, I want to go here and visit,
Sure.
this place.
Sure. In fact, so at the beginning when I was learning to project, it would be a very conscious act. So I would be maybe listening to binaural beats, or I'd be relaxing, or I'd be using the CDs, or, just simply going through the exercises in the book. And but after a while, I got to the point where I would find myself either out of body, or I would find myself in a state that was where I knew I could project, or I would be in a lucid dream and I would convert that to an out of body experience, a projection. And in those cases, I would be in the astral planes, and I would have what I would see a lot of times would be a very dark environment, and then I would see what you would think of as a grid-like plane stretching out across the horizon, and then I could fly into, and that's usually how, if I was going to navigate to a different level, I would see that plane, and I would go toward the plane, and I would go through the plane at various angles, and that's how I would get to a realm. Or there was one occasion where I went to sleep, and then I woke up, and I was standing, it was nighttime, and I was standing in front of my parents' house, and it was perfectly real. It was as if I was truly standing there, and a rain had just fallen, and I could kind of smell this first rain of the season. And I had no clue what I was doing standing there. I was a little muddle-headed, trying to figure out what was going on. And I looked down. I was standing in the middle of the street, and it was just quiet, empty, dark neighborhood. And in the middle of the street, there was my personal computer, and it had been smashed on the ground. And I was looking at this, and all of a sudden, I lifted up, and I was floating, and I was moving down the street, and I was moving toward, I'm trying to think of I was moving south, and I was moving toward this, like, I don't know, like a tunnel, like kind of like a black hole that you would see in the movies, but it was with light instead of dark. And I went through this kind of this tunnel. It wasn't a tunnel that I would say that you would imagine when you hear about a near-death experience, because it was more like a tube, in that it curved in different ways, and it had like a very colorful, beautiful harlequin pattern on the sides, and it had this kind of calliope music, kind of like the last music at the end of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, the very end, and I had read later that was one means of traveling when you're doing a higher level projection, from going from one realm to another, and unfortunately that was the last memory I was able to take back. So I know I went there and I did something cool. I just don't remember what it was. So I think I sidetracked from your question. What was your question again? Sorry.
Oh, the question was about destinations and astral travels.
Right. Sure. Sure, but so I guess what I would say is now I don't usually consciously decide I'm going to go see somebody or I'm going to go somewhere. It just kind of happens, and I'm kind of cruising, I guess, astral cruising.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you, Brian.
Brian, I was curious, and you touched on this just a little bit. When one astral travels, what or where is the destination? Is one visiting other realms or dimensions, different worlds? Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, my understanding is that and because I don't know. I mean, we have quantum physics that are talking about the multiverse and having, say, different levels of vibration, kind of the way you would think about different radio frequencies being, in the same space, but only experienced when you tune into them. And so the idea, my understanding is that when you project, you're creating this projectable double. And let's say you were projecting into kind of an Earth-like environment. That projectable double will probably be more dense because the environment you're working in is maybe of a lower vibrational rate. And then when you project into an astral realm, you're actually the projectable double you're using for those realms, I think, vary in rate of vibration and frequency, so that you can experience those different levels with a different astral body. Essentially, your consciousness is there, and I think that the further you get, the higher of level, and the further you get away from your body, and the less, Earth-like it is. I think it's harder to remember those experiences and to be able to make sense of them, because they may probably conceivably be more dreamlike.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that
Does that
makes
answer your
sense.
question?
Yeah, it does, and it makes sense. I appreciate that. And then on that topic, a little more, I've read accounts of other astral travelers, and they've stated that there are entire cities in the astral world, complete with houses, malls, parks, etc. Have you been to these places? And in your opinion, what purpose do these places offer, and why would we want to visit these types of cities?
Yeah, I've been to some really cool cities that look like these magnificent future cities with really tall buildings, really beautiful, kind of like you would see in a science fiction movie, where they're just incredibly huge. And I have been to mall-like areas, and I've definitely been to other worlds, and some of them seem very Earth-like, and others, I remember there was this one time where I went. So I want to just describe a little bit So a lot of times when I'm in the astral planes, or I see the grid-like uh, astral plane, in the darkness. Sometimes it's a blue color. Other times it's just kind of almost like seeing a black and white movie. And when I approach the astral plane, it's kind of a little bit hard to describe, but what you would think it would just be this, like a football field with a grid. But when you get closer to it, it's actually, if you would imagine, say, maybe I'm making it's like a 2 yard by 2 yard plywood, but imagine that being like a black plane,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be coming like perpendicular from the main plane, and then that plane would have several other perpendicular structures in it. It doesn't quite seem symmetrical, and so I would just head toward one of those planes, and on the other side of it, I'm in some sort of other world. And like I said, it could be that it's very Earth-like in terms of being kind of physical. And I remember one occasion where I went through this, and I was and it's kind of hard to describe. It was kind of like being in a water world in a way, because everyone was floating around, and everyone kind of looked like fish, but not really. It was very alien looking, and we weren't flying and we weren't swimming, but it was somewhere in between. And that was, very interesting experience. But and so I've had these experiences, but I couldn't tell you how they interrelate, or what they were, or what they mean. But it can be fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And so you really have your choice of different cities to visit, or because I've also read that's where astral travelers tend to go, that they group in these cities. So, I mean, are there like several to choose from?
I'm sure there are, yeah, different levels. And so I remember, I'm trying to think of the most memorable experience I had. I went and it's kind of a strange experience. So, and this happened. I'm trying to think of when this happened, but I remember going to this level where there was this amazing city, and I went up into one of the higher buildings, and there was this apartment, and I went to visit my brother, and my brother had said that he had passed on, and that this is where he was living now, and he was having this, this is where this was his life, and and I was very, it was kind of, it was a cool place, and he seemed happy enough, but he was at the time still alive, and as we speak, he is still alive. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But I don't know. It's hard to tell when these things happen, and you meet people like my brother that what sort of sequence they're in. Because if I go back to my parents and it turns out to be some scene from high school, it can be
Right.
confusing. Yeah.
So did your brother recall that you had visited him there at all?
It's one of those things that I didn't want to freak him out, so I don't think he
Right.
knows about.
Exactly. Well, especially what happened with your grandfather. You
Yeah,
would
exactly.
almost think that's real. So
Exactly.
that's interesting. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And Chipper Dog has a question for you.
Brian, you spoke of what I've come to call octaves of energy and how the people and locations that you saw took on the appearance in real life. Do you have a feel for how much of what you view, experience, is bleed through from your own psyche's imagery and projection? And how do you determine at that time which is which?
That's actually a great question. I don't. It's hard to know what's going on. When you do this enough, you come to recognize the state of consciousness that's not a dream, and that's more stable, and that's
right.
And it's hard to know that if you might be looking at energy, and you might be projecting from your consciousness what that you might, for example, let's say I recognize my brother, and he was just energy, but because I recognized his energy, I projected his form.
Right.
Yeah, right, exactly. What I expect him to look like on his body. But by the same token, if I had come across my grandparents, I would think I would have expected to see them how I remembered them in life. And in both cases, they were young and attractive. And so I would think that would go against that. It was something that I projected from my consciousness.
Unless what you saw was how they felt about how they looked.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, I've heard on several. I've written a novel about a spirit guide, essentially, is the protagonist, and so I did a lot of research into near-death experience in the afterlife, and I read a lot of near-death experiences, and invariably you'll hear that when people have a near-death experience and they see people from life, they'll be younger, and they'll be, they'll look more attractive than they did
Sure.
in real life. Yeah.
That's just, I could go asking questions for hours on those, because I don't have even a partial amount of experience that you've been describing. That first experience that I had, I snapped back and didn't do anything for lots of years.
Right.
But anyway, to ask the question here, are you familiar with the yogic cities? And if so, are remote viewing and astral travel different names for some of them?
That's so. When you say yogic cities, you're meaning a city?
No, it's
okay.
SIDDHIS.
Oh, okay, sure.
And the 5 of the main ones are knowing the past, present, and future, tolerance of heat, cold, and other dualities, knowing the minds of others, and so on, checking the influence of fire, sun, water in your body, and remaining unconquered by others. And what some of the discussion has been is resonant to those. And I was just wondering if you had run across that in your travels in recent.
I haven't. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about my understanding of remote viewing versus astral travel.
Uh-huh.
And my understanding has always been that there were two different types of projections. But are you familiar at all with Dr. Melvin Morse's work on near-death experiences?
No, I'm not.
He's a pediatric doctor out of Seattle Children's Hospital, and he's done a lot of work both with near-death experiences and with remote viewing. And I remember him talking about an experiment that he tried where he was going to have a remote viewer come to, not project, but target something that was in his living room on the dining room table. I'm sorry, in the dining room on the dining room table. And so he placed this object there, and he was kind of, circulating in the house with his family. And his daughter, about the time when the person was supposed to do the remote viewing, started to interact with something that was in the room. And actually, I think, if I remember the story correctly, went and got her tea set and put it on the table and started interacting with what appeared to be someone who was in the room.
Right.
And so if someone was just remote viewing, you would think that there would be anything there to perceive, that it would just be some mental projection that they were taking back. So, and I don't think people who are experienced in remote viewing, and I am not one of them, would agree with me, but yet there was that story. So I don't, and maybe the person was projecting along with remote viewing, but, who knows?
Yeah, right. Well, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Chipper. And next up, Lenny has a question.
Brian, you mentioned traveling into the past. Can you cross timelines and travel into the future? And do you use any strategies like frequency resonance, binaural beats to get there? And is there any way to distinguish between the main trunk of future reality and any other possible futures?
Well, I've never tried to actually to project into the future, at least not astral project into the future. And but I have on a few occasions. When I was in the fourth grade, I had this experience in which I was having what I thought at the time was a very lucid dream, and I was walking down what was like this long hallway, and there were windows along the sides of the hallways that looked into other rooms, which seemed odd to me as a kid because you think a window looks out into, outside. And so I walked down this hallway and I turned the corner and I went into this, what appeared to be a classroom. And there were these other kids there that I didn't recognize. And I remember seeing on the wall very vividly this poster of an astronaut doing an EVA. They were kind of, out on a tether in space. And I remember there was all these kids, and they were different races. There was an Asian person, a black person. We all held hands in a circle, and there was this jolt, like a jolt of electricity, and I felt that falling sensation, and I snapped back in my body. About a year later, I was in the fifth grade now, and I was in a field trip on the campus of UC Berkeley, and we were in like the science department. And I hate to date myself a little bit, but there was these new computers, and the computers were such that there wasn't even a monitor. There was like a typewriter with a scrolling piece of paper that came out the top. And the teacher said, would anyone like to see the demonstration of Mr. Wizard? And I wasn't interested. What was interesting about this particular field trip is that I only went with a small group of people from my school, so I didn't know a lot of the people who were there. And I decided too late to go see this demonstration, and I was by myself, and I was walking down this hall, and I was looking to other classrooms. And I walked in, and I remember looking up and seeing this space poster and thinking it looked familiar, having that kind of deja vu feeling. And they were doing a demonstration on electronics, and they were doing, playing with different, static electricity, that sort of thing. And at one point they had everyone, I didn't know anyone in the room because they were all from different schools, and they said, I want everyone to hold hands in a circle, and I'm going to introduce this battery into the circle. And so we all held hands, and two people touched the positive and negative ends of the battery. And, before he did this, he said, do you think we're going to get a shock? And everyone said no, and of course we didn't get shocked. And then he said, now if I add this transistor, what do you think is going to happen? And so he plugged this in, and I said no, but I was a little nervous. And then I felt this tremendous shock, and when that happened, I instantly remembered that experience from the year before. So again, that was something that happened that was pretty specific, that I don't think was a coincidence.
And it was spontaneous.
Right, precisely. That's kind of where I started to get into to this stuff, was with that experience.
That sounds a whole lot like precognition to me.
You know, I would say that that's true. What's different about that experience was the very lucid nature of it, and the feeling of, when I had that shock, the feeling of falling into my body.
Yeah.
So you're right. It could have been some sort of dream. You know, again, who knows what that consciousness was. A little bit later, when I was in college and I was trying to learn to get out of my body, I had this experience where I wanted to project to a friend's house, and she was away at college, and she was like a block away. I thought it was a nice target. So I remember having this projection, and I remember I didn't trust, when I was out of my body, I didn't trust my ability to fly there. I wanted to walk, because I knew I would be able to get there. Didn't want to like mess with instantaneous travel. Yeah. So I walked out the front door, and I remember looking down, and I was wearing certain clothes, and I had sunglasses on my face. And so I pulled the sunglasses off, and there was another pair of sunglasses that was there. Like my face was this sunglasses dispenser. So I didn't mess with it. Walked to my friend's house. I went through was the door. I passed through the door, and no one was home. And what was really weird about this projection was that I was projecting at night, but the scene occurred during daylight. And all of a sudden, a door opens to a bathroom, and my friend's mother comes out, and she sees me, and she says, "Oh, hello. Like, what are you doing here? Why are you in my house?" And I instantly snapped back into my body. Right. And so I didn't think much of it, because it seemed kind of weird that it was daylight when it happened. And about a week later, it was election time, and I was going to walk to the polling place. And I left the house, and I went in the opposite direction of my friend's house. And I didn't realize it, but I was wearing the same clothes, and I had sunglasses on. And I got into the polling place, and it was during the day, and there wasn't a lot of people around, so it was just a few people voting. And I voted, and I turned around, and there was my friend's mother. And she looked at me, and she said, "Oh, hello," exactly like in my projection. So that, again, I don't think that's a coincidence. No. Because there was so much of it but it wasn't exactly what I experienced in the projection. So I don't know, it's hard to know what's going on there.
Yeah, but it makes you question the nature of time when stuff like that happens, huh?
Exactly. And our access to it.
Yeah, and how we perceive what it is that we're actually seeing based on what we may be familiar with.
Right. One of the times, and I think this is mentioned in my book, and I hope I remember this correctly, because it happened a long time ago, when I was projecting, and I projected to my parents' house, and I walked into my bedroom, and it was arranged the way it was when I was a senior in high school. Right. And I saw myself sleeping on the bed, and I thought, what would it be possible to jump into my body and interact with people, and from that time? So I tried to do this. I tried to jump in my body, and I just kind of bounced off, and the sleeping Brian turned around, grabbed me, and kissed me. And it was kind of very bizarre. But get that question strangely quite a bit. Can you go back and get into your body in a different time and maybe change, your current reality? And that's such a great science fiction concept, but I don't know that would work.
Yeah, kind of like an overlay.
Right.
Well, that's just fascinating, and I think Gemini has a real pertinent question on that.
Thanks, Chipper. Brian, I was just kind of curious, as you're talking about your experiences, when we experience deja vu, does it play into that somehow, where we're like maybe recalling where we've been astral traveling? Because there's times when I have deja vu, I think, if I could just remember a couple seconds more, it might just unfold completely.
Right. Yeah, I think the bigger question is that when we project at night on a nightly basis, where are we going, and the way I like to think of it is kind of the metaphor of like kind of like you're in a prize fight, and and the bell rings, and at the end of the round, and you go over and you talk to the coach and you get some water, and you kind of strategize for the next round about how you're going to, what you're going to do. And I think it's kind of like the same thing. It's like you get out of your body and you travel, and maybe you travel into possible futures, and you maybe make choices that you try to bring back to your conscious waking self. And that maybe we do when we find ourselves on maybe the right path, the path that we intended to be on when we were out there exploring. We experience those deja vus. Do you notice when you have deja vus, do they come in like you get more than one in a short period of time?
Yeah, actually I do. Yes.
And I think that is wise. I think that's a good sign that you're on a path that you want to be on.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. Wow. Well, and that kind of moves then into the next question that I have for you is, in your opinion, and you've kind of touched on this, that we're living simultaneous lives, and that when we astral travel, are we experiencing those lives or just kind of going in and out of those lives? Since time is not, I guess, linear.
Right, right. But would you say, when you say lives, you mean like we're having different experiences on Earth simultaneously, or are you talking about in different astral realms?
I guess I mean different astral realms, where we've had maybe like spontaneous recall of past lives, or some people have had, visions of future lives, and maybe they're happening all simultaneously. And when we astral travel, are we visiting them or
Right,
dropping into those? What
right.
is your thought on that?
Well, didn't Robert Monroe? Wasn't there like a locale where he would go, and he had like a parallel life where he was there, and he had a different wife, and there were slightly different rules in terms of social rules, and even the
Mm-hmm.
way. I'm pretty convinced that our consciousness, as we experience it in the body, is only one level of a more profound, higher, entity, and that we're in physical bodies, and they're vehicles of consciousness to experience this dense material world, and we're here for a reason, and we're here to learn. But that, yes, absolutely, that we're having that there is, you can call it the higher self, you can call it something Jungian, but essentially that there's a higher level of consciousness, an oversoul, that is maybe having more than one life experience on Earth at the same time, as far as we experience time. So there may be a different you living in Bangladesh, having different experiences. And as far as maybe the level of your oversoul or your higher self, those are all going on simultaneously. But you might experience it as a past life. You might, but you might have that memory with you, or that level, some level of knowledge of those other lives at some higher level of consciousness.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you. Do you see any of your pets that you had from your childhood while you astral travel, or do you see pets in that realm?
I have, when I was first, I have a cat named Mrs. Claus, like Santa Claus's wife, but it was spelled with like, Claus on a
Right.
paw.
Cute.
And I remember I was out of it was like one night when I had several projections. I would have projection after projection. And I remember she was flying around, and I remember she flew through the window outside, and I followed her, and then I realized I can't fly, and I fell.
Oh
So I
gosh.
guess I have that's the most memorable time. I'm sure there's been other times, but that was the more memorable.
And so
So
your
it's
cat at the time was still alive. It wasn't
Right,
like,
exactly,
okay, okay.
exactly.
Interesting.
it's interesting that you've talked a couple of times about saying a limitation, recognizing a limitation from your daily life during projection, and then mimicking that limitation.
Right, right. And I think that you're projecting into the level that's closest to the Earth, that where I think those limitations tend to be there in my experience. Whereas when you're in the astral planes, you're flying around. It's not, you have less of those.
Yeah.
Less of those limitations, I think.
Interesting.
When you were talking to Gemini a few minutes ago, you made a comment about she might have another existence in Bangladesh, and I kind of did a double take, and I wasn't sure how to phrase a quick follow up. Did you mean that when you say she had another existence, like the collective group of humans has that, or that she is simultaneously could be in Bangladesh or in an alternate lifestyle, or how did you mean that?
I meant that she could get on a plane and meet someone else who is part of her soul group. So my understanding of this, and this is the way I frame it, is that, so if you think about past lives, which I believe that we have existed before, and but I don't think there's enough past lives for other people who are on Earth to all. So, for example, I don't think we have enough past lives to go around. But what I do believe is that that as an oversoul, and the way I see an oversoul is kind of like this spiritual being with all these tentacles that are out and maybe touching the Earth at different points in time, and that it's possible that right now that we have more than one or two, or I think even Dick Sutphin did some research on this, maybe several different concurrent lifetimes going simultaneously, as far as we're concerned now, being concurrent.
Wow. Okay.
So I don't think. Well, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that that time is a limitation. That, for example, that you would have to have died and then come back, many years later to have a past life. I think that you can be experiencing those simultaneously.
Could you?
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to ask if you would mind expanding on that idea of the soul group.
Well, I think, I think that we are more than just. I mean, so think about this. Okay, let's say that, for example, there are past lives, and that you pass on, and okay, so now you pass on, and you see relatives, and then you decide to be reborn, and then you experience a new life, and that you were a man in one life, now you're a woman. Right. Now you die again, and so who are you at that point? Are you the man you were the first time, or are you the woman that you are the second time? And I think what it is that you're both those things, but you're at a higher level. You are this kind of consciousness that I'm calling the oversoul. You can think of your higher self, but something that's greater than any one particular lifetime, but that is kind of overseeing in a way all the separate lifetimes, and has the benefit of all those experiences going on.
Yeah, that just sounds so resonant with me, and that's you spoke earlier of deja vu, and that's the path you're on, right? And to me, that screams of resonance right there. When you're right there in the groove, things come together very, very well.
When you use the word oversoul, not to tie you down, but are you referring to, like, the oversoul would include everyone who has ever lived, or are there numerous oversouls which include little groups of people, or how do you visualize that?
I'm thinking that there would be many oversouls that would so one oversoul would encompass one, various people's lifetimes, all at some higher level.
Okay.
So kind of like, I mean, so in the book about the novel that I wrote about the spirit guide, it's about this guy who lived and who dies at about age 30, and he finds out that one of his friends is going back to Earth for another lifetime, and he is signed on before he was even born to be her spirit guide. So it's his kind of journey overseeing her and letting go of stuff about his life. And it's called Oversoul Incorporated, and it kind of addresses this idea of it's almost like a company in a way, and there is the president of the company, and would be the oversoul, and there might be at various people that are at a lower level, but they're all essentially that oversoul, that consciousness that's wanting to have these various experiences for whatever reason.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions or follow-up?
Well, I'm always fascinated by dreams and the things that happen to us, and just glimpses of these alternate realities that are happening somewhere. Do you tie that into the notion of, like, maybe what are some of your compatriots in the same oversoul, what they're doing in another place right now, or?
Yeah, it certainly could be that. I mean, I think if you're thinking about quantum physics and the idea of a multiverse and there being various alternate realities, so there might be a reality in which I'm the same person, but maybe I'm a doctor or I'm a bum or whatever, and I almost wonder if when we're talking about the law of attraction and we're talking about doing affirmations and visualizing where we want to be in the future. I wonder if we're just kind of aligning our frequency to that alternate universe and we're just bringing it closer. So the more consistent our thoughts and our feelings are about where we want to be in the future, it will manifest because we're moving toward those alternate realities.
Okay. Thank you.
Brian, are you familiar with the writer A.E. Van Vogt? V-O-G-T?
I might be, but I probably have never pronounced this. Or what has he written?
He's written the World of Null A.
No, I haven't.
Oh, you'll have to look into it. But
okay.
His protagonist is named Gilbert Gossane, Gossyn, and the premise of his books is non-Aristotelian thought, right? But the protagonist travels, not just projects, but actually physically travels based on a 20 decimal place resonance with the place that he wants to go to. And that just sounds so familiar with what you just said. And I wonder if that's where we're all headed, because it's sounding more and more like that to me.
That's fascinating. What was it? Can you tell me the author's name again?
A.E. Van Vogt.
Oh, great. Okay.
And I think it's the World of Null A. But it's a series, and he goes through it. And I think once you read that first one, you'll read the series. But your novels. I'm kind of a poet, right? Or
Sure.
I practiced trying to be a poet, and I haven't questioned my source of my muse. And what it sounds like you're doing is in your novels, you're living these alternate levels at the same time. And I just wondered how you got the impetus to write something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. One of the things that when you spend any time in the publishing world, they want you to have things like a villain and a
formula,
formula and a conflict and write about dark stuff. And I think you can have conflict without going there. And so to answer your question, I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I know when I wrote Oversoul Incorporated, in a way it was kind of I don't want to say the information was coming from somewhere, and it was very cool. I don't know that it was all me, But I remember I was chatting with another writer, and her daughter had some difficulties, but she was a indigo child, and
Yeah.
said that she could see angels and she could see spirit guides, and so she was sitting there while we were chatting. So I had to ask, what can you tell me about my spirit guide? And she didn't know about my novel, but or what I was writing, but she talked about that my guides were pretty jazzed about this thing I was writing. So maybe I was getting help.
Wow. Interesting. Cool. Thank you.
Wow, Brian, thank you. This has been a really enlightening interview. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was very enjoyable.
And I wanted to thank you for sharing your remarkable experiences and research with us this evening. And on behalf of Fox and all of our listeners, it's been a pleasure to have you join us at Time Monk Radio Network.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Just fascinating.